everyday witches emerge from the shadows of secrecy. Broom closets are flinging open and witches are taking flight. Whether you are hiding in your cozy closet or flying with pride, stay for a spell as Witchcasting with Theodora Pendragon and her guests share magical moments, stir the cauldron, and debunk misinformation and misconceptions about paganism, witches, and our wonderful world of magic.
Hello, everyone. Today I have a special guest. He's a double special guest because he's been on the podcast before. We have Petros today. Hello, Petros.
Hi, how are you today?
I am good. Today we are going to talk about covens.
Ooh, that's a great topic.
It is. So many people don't know about covens. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. On Instagram, a witch contacted me. Hunter Valley Witch from Australia wants to know about covens. And the first question is, what does it take to start a coven? That's a loaded question, isn't it?
It is a loaded question, but it's a good one. We got that question a lot.
Okay, where would you like to start with that?
Well, I think coven is a business, and it needs to be run like a business. Most people don't. I mean, how many rich pagans do you know? I mean, there's not a lot of rich pagans. It's in our heritage. It's in our ethos to give, right? So everybody wants to do that. So it's very easy to be manipulated and taken advantage of. But I think a coven's a business. If you start it thinking it's not a business, you're absolutely going to spend a lot of your own money. You're going to do a lot of things trying to figure it out. So you should plan it as a business, have everything figured out. But I think prior to starting a coven, if you're looking for a coven, really you should interview them and they should interview you. Most people are after lineage, right? They're like, oh, I've got to find somebody that's got all that lineage so that I know they're teaching me something good, right? So, you get the person that says, hey, I'm a direct descendant of Gerald Gardner. So everybody thinks they can teach, and they can't teach kids to tie shoes, right? It's really not about that lineage. It's about the education that the person has. And you should interview them, and the coven should interview you. And if you're a good fit, I think it would be great. But there's a lot of questions you have to ask. Don't you think?
There are. And you have had at least one coven.
Yes. My teacher told me that when we completed my third degree ritual, I was told you will never truly understand your magic, the full potential of your magic, until you run a coven.
And when you had a teacher, your teacher, did you belong to a coven?
It's when we were in the military. So in our previous podcast, we talked about that, right?
I know you were on the last podcast. So if anybody missed Petros's podcast about being in the military, you'll want to listen to that one. So you were in the military, and that's how you learned about covens.
Yes, we started working together with the high priest, and it was all male, right? There were no females with us at that time. So we were in Germany, and we actually started working with another coven, but it probably took us a year, maybe 2 years to find them before we ran into them and created or started working with the group.
You were initiated in that coven?
I was initiated and given my first, second, and third degree, not with that coven, with our group.
Oh, with your group.
Our high priest, yes. So, and that's the other thing, right? When we came back here, I planned on starting a coven, but I wanted to have all of my ducks in a row, all of my documentation, kind of like school, right? Have the Book of Shadows created. What are you going to do in the first, second, and third degree? Write all that down, create all that space, understand it, make sure you don't miss something. And one of the other students, also a high priest, he introduced me to two people. We were going to do the coven together, start it together. And Yeah. He became an over-the-road truck driver and left me with my first two husband and wife coveners just out of the blue. So I had everything created for the first, second degree, was putting everything together how I wanted to go for third degree. And poof, we ended up with members and the coven. And we became one of the largest covens in the state. We had at one time 52 or 54 members.
That's a huge coven.
Yeah, everybody's like, you can't do that. You have to stop at 13. No, you don't.
That's something that most people believe, is that a coven is between 3 and 13 people. But you had over 50 people in your coven. So how did that happen? And how did that work out?
I was really trying to shake things up. I did not want to do things the way things were always done, because it's about the education. And I think the more people you have, the more diversity you have, the more you can learn from each other. So I wanted to create a coven where the high priest, high priestess, and the coveners all learned. So we used the Wiccan tradition as our teaching medium, but we told all of our participants, whatever you choose as your path, we'll do your degrees personally in that path. So if I didn't know it, then I had to go find somebody that did. I had to go find another coven that was a Satru, or I had to find somebody that was Dianic. How am I going to do Dianic rituals? I can't do those. It just doesn't quite work well that way.
Okay, so some people do not know what a Dianic tradition is. Do you want to explain what a Dianic tradition is?
The easiest way to understand it is that the only purpose for a male would be a life support system for a penis. That's about it.
And the coven is all female.
Correct, yeah. So it's very difficult for me to do anything in the Dianic space. But at that time, we didn't have a high priestess. It was just me as the high priest. It just worked over time. We were around for almost 13 years. And we had everything from a Satru. We did have Dianics, Egyptian, Norse. We even had an Aztec. That one was interesting to do because it's not legal to sacrifice people. But it was quite a learning experience, not only for me, but for the coveners. And that's what we were after. Everybody learned how to do everything that was required in the Wiccan tradition because it's the one that most of the information was available in. So it was the easiest medium to teach. But getting into that personal space was amazing. And everybody did rituals, public rituals, private rituals. And we taught them to do those from each of the positions, all the way from calling the quadrants through being the high priest and high priestess. It was amazing. It was an amazing learning experience.
What advice would you give someone if they want to begin their own coven?
Research. Put everything down in your book of shadows that you're going to do, everything that you're going to teach. So, for example, it's a business. Treat it as a business. So you need a business plan. You need a mission statement. Who are you? What are you going to do? How are you going to do it? What are you going to teach? Lay all of that out and create everything you would need to do those pieces before you ever get your first covener. If you don't, you're really going to struggle. You're going to struggle to get the information across to them and to correctly do it, but to do the degrees and to do the education, all of those pieces. But also understand what is your coven about. I've seen a lot of covens fail, and I've seen a few be quite successful for a long time. The difference is truly in defining what that coven's going to be. I think they can be successful. When we closed the coven, we decided, I said, man, he was right. I was never going to truly understand everything about my magic until we ran the coven, because the drama that's involved in running a coven is absolutely crazy. So if you don't have all of those things laid out in place before you even start, you're going to be adding things in the middle. It's very confusing. It's hard for people to understand. For example, disciplinary action. What's going to happen if somebody breaks the rules? And not only that, what if somebody breaks the law? For example, let's say you're doing a Gnostic mass, and which has a sky-clad female sitting on the altar and a high priest doing the ritual. He's not supposed to touch her at all below the neck. And what if he does without her permission and she files charges? I mean, you've got some problems on your hand there that are now, not only are they a problem in your coven, but they're legal problems that you can go to jail for and absolutely damage your life for forever. So it's really important to truly understand and lay the ground rules of what's allowed. Are you going to allow kids in the coven? We had entire families in ours, so we set up those guidelines about what you can and cannot do in front of children. And sorry, the kids can't come today, or the kids can, but the parents had the right to say yes or no, but the coven also had the right to say, nope, we're not going to allow children to be here today. So you got to really plan those things out and understand the legalities of it. It's not necessarily just a group of people getting together to sit around a fire, right? It can get tricky.
I think there's a misconception about covens in that way, because there are so many people who think, hey, let's start a coven. And I see this online a lot. Hey, let's have a coven. Okay. Do they really understand what's involved in starting a coven? Have you seen that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been asked to start covens since we closed the last one, and I absolutely refused. I've had enough of that beating. I learned a lot, but I think now I just want to sit around with a group of people who are educated and understand what it's all about. And if we choose to do a ritual, we choose to do a ritual. But there's no time other than I'm spending time with friends. So you can have that coven, right? You can have a coven where, hey, we're going to meet at so-and-so's house this week, and because it's a Sabbath or an S-spot, we're going to do a ritual. Hey, that's awesome. But if you're going to take it into a formalized education space, that becomes something totally different, and you've really got to plan it.
Your coven was to educate your coven members, your coven brothers and sisters.
Correct. And us. I don't believe that our learning stops when we become the high priest or the high priestess, right? I think it's just like business. If you stop doing things, if you don't change, if you don't improve, if you don't add, then you're dying, right? If you're not changing, then the covenant's going to go away. It's just going to happen. Yeah, it was all about teaching, and I truly thought that it was just going to be my education piece was going to be teaching the students what they needed to know. But when we added that extra piece, I wanted to challenge myself and say, okay, I'll do your degrees in whatever tradition you want. And then if I don't have the data, I'll go get it. So it forced me to go learn about things that I didn't know about. It was amazing. If I had that all to do over again, I would do it exactly the same way.
And how long did you have your coven?
I think we were 13 years.
And it was the same coven? So it wasn't several covens during the 13 years. It was one coven?
Correct. One coven. Now we had members that came and went. People moved. People passed away. People decided not to do it. Life got busy. So it was an influx of people. At the peak, we had about 54 members. And we worked all over the state. We did Council of Magical Arts. We would go to those events, but we really tried to challenge the norm. Became very funny to watch. Most covens are run by a high priestess. So when we first started, it was run by a high priest, and they were not quite sure how to deal with that configuration of a coven, because I could work with any female that was in the coven. They had all been trained to do those pieces and parts. They just hadn't mastered their pieces or made the third degree yet. But we did one of the most fun times we had, or event that we did. We called it a ritual basic training, and it started on a Friday and it ended on a Sunday. Everybody thought we were going camping, and they arrived at the house and we went, okay, we're not leaving. We have the courtyard. We had a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, and our courtyard was a fenced courtyard, and this is where our circle was. And so we said, we're going to do ritual basic training. So every 30 minutes for the next 3 days, somebody is going to be putting on a ritual. And you have to write it. You have to figure it out. You have to define who's in what position, who are your summoners, who's your maiden, who are all of those pieces. That was so much fun. And we were so exhausted by the time it was done. But everyone got to learn and participate with each other, being the high priest, the high priestess, each of the positions, and having to figure out someone else's ritual and understand how to align your energies and your thought process to that ritual. It was absolutely a blast. So we did that quite frequently. We'd show up, somebody would say, we want you to do a ritual. And I would just go pick one or two people. So you're going to be high priest, you're going to be high priestess, run with it. And they would create the ritual and do it. It was amazing.
Did they write the ritual or did they
Yes.
just?
They had to write the ritual, and I had to see the ritual, and I had to approve the ritual, make sure they had all the components in it and everything was done correctly. But yes, they wrote the rituals. I approved them. They did them.
So this was over a long weekend, and you have over 50 people?
For that weekend, we had about, some people arrived at different days, but at any given time, we had about 18 people.
Okay, so you had ritual basic training, and each person had to do the ritual.
Mm-hmm.
How much time was in between all the rituals?
30 minutes.
So was there a time that everybody had to cleanse themselves?
Absolutely. Have you ever seen 18 people try to stuff themselves in the shower? That is the funniest thing in the world to see. And we did that intentionally because so many people are getting into a coven are focused on sex, right? And some people don't, they're very private. They don't want to be seen. They don't go skyclad. So I wanted to remove that space. I wanted them to not have enough time to even think about it. So if we required ritual cleansing or cleansing before the ritual, then I would tell them you have 15 minutes and everybody's got to take a ritual shower. And so nobody cared. Everybody was just trying to get in, get under the water, wash each other, get out, however you have to do it. It was funny. 18 people stuffed into a shower was one of the funniest things I'd ever seen.
You're all family, right? So why not?
Absolutely. It was great fun. And by the end of the weekend, we would do what the military calls an after-action review, right? So we had a feast at the end of Sunday at noon. We would sit down and, okay, we're done. Let's talk about it. Let's eat. So we'd all prepare a meal together. We'd sit down and eat together, and then we would talk about what we got. And everybody had a blast. Everybody was tired, but everybody laughed about something. Somebody messed up somewhere. Everybody did, including me. Once you get that tired, things just happen. So it was amazing.
A big question that people who don't know anything about pagans or covens ask is, do you guys do orgies? Do you get that question?
Yes, everybody was always interested in the sex magic, and it would go OTO just for that. And my humble opinion that the first two degrees in the OTO are weeding out the people that came there for sex magic and the ones that were really there to understand what the OTO is about. And it's no different in the covens, right? And that's comes back to that interview space. I mean, the sexual energy of a human being is probably the most powerful energy they have when they're starting. So it's easy for them to focus on that, right? It's the only thing that gives me the power that I have. It's not. It's just one of the things that you use to spin that energy. So it is something you have to deal with. It is something you have to understand, and it's always going to be there. But no, we're not doing orgies. We're not. It's not what happens here. So that becomes part of that interview process, right? When you are interviewing someone for a coven, you need to truly understand what are they there for. If you're not comfortable with yourself and your own sexuality and your own education about your tradition, then you can find yourself letting the wrong people into the coven. Then you have drama. Then you have problems. We had a couple that made it in that were all about the sex, and they weeded themselves out very quickly. They didn't come back.
Are you saying they were imposters?
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. They watched a bunch of practical magic and thought that's what it was all about.
When you do the interview process, are there certain questions that you ask? Can you give an example of the questions you ask for someone who's interested in joining your coven?
We usually try to ask open-ended questions, right? You want to ask, what are your intentions? What is it that you want to learn? How do you want to learn that? What's your experience? How has that worked for you in the past? Have you belonged to other groups? If so, why did you leave them? Or are you still with them? So anything like that will give you an understanding of the person's morals and values, right? We interview for jobs the same way. We know what we want what the job is, and we know the right person to fill it's going to have those credentials. So I would write those questions down and solicit help to write those down. And don't do the interview by yourself. Make sure there's more than one person there so you can get a good read for the person, just like you would in a job interview. It's usually not just one person. There's usually two or three.
If I wanted to join a coven, what questions should I ask them?
My first question would be, what tradition are you teaching? Because I really want to know if I'm going to get that story that they're the long lost relative of Gerald Gardner, right? If I get that story, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to stay.
All right, tell us what that means, because some people may not know about Gerald Gardner and the lineage.
Yeah, everybody wants to they want to make sure they're getting the right data, right? They want to make sure they're getting real information. And I think that's great. But in the process of that, we have come up with people who will say, I am direct lineage of Gerald Gardner, or a coven in Ireland, or a coven in Scotland, or a coven wherever, right? That's great. But that lineage doesn't do me any good. What I need to know is, who are you, right? What are you teaching me? If I'm coming to you for data, I don't care where you got the data, but I just want to know that you have legitimate data and you're for real. You're not a fake. You didn't watch a whole bunch of practical magic and decided that's how the coven's going to be run, right?
How do you know who the fakers are, though? If I am coming to you, I want to join your coven, how would you know that I'm a faker, that I just don't want to come there and have sex with all your coven members?
I would say invite them to come participate. Let them come have a meal with the coven. Let the coven interview them. Let some interaction happen. Don't allow them in until you've seen how they are. For example, a public ritual that you would allow somebody in that's not a member of your coven. You would do something, celebration of the moon, or the cycles, or the sun, however you choose to do it. And let them participate and have the conversation and see if they're truly there to get the data or what they're really focused on. And let your coven answer that too, right? Yes, the high priest and high priestess are going to define who's coming in, but the coven has a right to provide input into that decision.
I was actually going to ask that question, but you answered it. Thank you. You don't have a coven now, is that correct?
Correct. We do have a circle here. We're creating a ritual space so that any pagan of any tradition, if they happen to be in the area and need a place to do a ritual, there's always a circle standing, and they can come in by themselves, do their own rituals in that ritual space. We can be a part of it or not, because we work with so many military veterans, and sometimes people just need a space to do their own solitary rituals and be by themselves with their God and their universe. So we want to create that space here. Sometimes we get really serious. All the time we get really serious about what it is we're doing, but sometimes you just have to have fun. So we have done things like, we're going to do Disney rituals tonight, or the Smurfs rituals tonight. And yeah, we've taken on those characters and just had absolute fun in the circle too.
In many groups, whether it's a car club, dog group, whatever group, right? There's politics involved. Is there politics involved in the coven?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you're going to have to define what you allow, what you don't allow, right? I don't mind people having an opinion. I don't need people arguing about it. The coven's there to do the coven's work. Is there politics in that? Yes. When you're starting a coven, or when Fort Hood is starting their coven and taking on the military establishment to do that, yes, there's some politics. But how you manage the politics is kind of crazy, right? It's hard to do. We tried to keep politics out. If there were any conversations you wanted to have about politics, it was when all the work was done, or before all the work was done and people were going home. That's just one-on-one conversations sitting around outside. And everybody has an opinion. Everybody has an opinion about how magic should be done, right? So opinions are numerous, but they don't define you or how you do things. So, or they shouldn't, in my opinion. They shouldn't define how your coven does anything. So all of that should be written down. You're going to have to manage that.
I've even seen that online in some of the witch groups that I'm in. People will make a comment about, let's just say, candle magic, and somebody will say, "Oh, you didn't light the candle right," or "No, you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to do this." So you have the witch police in these groups. Like,
Absolutely. Or they think that kitchen witchery isn't real. I've had some of the most amazing meals in my life were prepared by witches using kitchen witchery. I'll take those any day over anything. So everybody has their opinion about, for example, I know OTO people that think that anything other than high magic OTO doesn't exist. It's not real. It's fake. It's worthless. So it's really up to the person, right? That's why the interview is so important. Make sure you get the right energies in your group.
you mentioned earlier about people breaking the rules. Has that happened in your coven where someone broke the rules and you had to take disciplinary action?
Yes.
Can you give an example?
We had a covener take advantage of someone else's magical gear. They decided that they could use it, take it home. There were places where if people wanted to leave athames, chalices that were personal to them, they had a place at the house they could lock those up. They could put them, and somebody took advantage of that. So that was written, that was known. You don't touch anyone else's stuff, particularly their ritual things, their magical things. You don't touch those without permission. It's immediate expulsion. And that's exactly what happened.
So pretty much they stole altar tools.
Yes.
How did you find out?
Well, the person came looking for their altar tools and they were gone. So we asked everyone who took them. They were here and now they're not. You're the only people that have been here. Somebody in this group took it. So who took it? And they owned up to it. Like you know the rules. Where are they? Go get them, retrieve them, bring them back here, give them back to the person they belong to, and gather your things and go. Just can't allow that. There's just some things you're gonna have to be pretty stringent about. And personal magical tools are damaging to people if they're left in the wrong hands. So no, we wouldn't allow that.
And there is etiquette and we have unspoken rules, and I would never even touch someone's altar tools without permission.
Correct. I have my own personal tools. My wife at that time was the high priestess and had her tools as well, but we had coven tools. Many of them had been made, some of them had been purchased, but those were the coven tools. Anybody in the coven could touch the coven tools and use them. If they wanted to do their own personal ritual, they would get there before anyone else or show up in the middle of the week. It's like, man, I need to do some cleansing. I'm going to borrow the altar space and the circle if you don't mind. And it was all theirs to use. But our personal tools were not left out in the open to be used. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. There is etiquette. Just don't mess with somebody else's tools.
Did you kick that person out of the coven?
Yes. The moment they retrieved the tools, they were asked to leave. They knew it was coming. It's a written rule. And then I had the conversation with them in front of the entire coven. You took their tools without permission. You cannot stay. You cannot come back. It was a hard day. It was a really good person that intentionally did something. If it had been a mistake, theirs looked like somebody else's tool and it got mixed up. I could understand that. But there was no question in whose tools they were. What about drugs?
Oh, what about drugs?
It's always an interesting one, right? If you belong to any of the chartered organizations, they usually have rules that state you cannot partake while you're there in that ritual space or during the programming, during people getting ready for ritual. From the time you start the meeting to the time you end the meeting, you can't have drugs there. So I have seen organizations come apart because the leader of the group broke the rules. The holder of the charter pulled it. Sorry, you can't follow the rules. So yeah, you really have to define what that's going to be too. What's the coven going to do? Are you going to allow it? Are you going to allow some? Are you going to allow alcohol? If you do, how much? At what point is it too much? Right? So those are all things that the high priest and high priestess are going to have to deal with. They're going to have to understand there are some rituals require alcohol, a lot of alcohol. So that's part of the ritual, and you're going to define what's going to be done and no more. So, yeah, there's a time and a place for it, and you have to define what that is and what you're going to allow. Sex, too, right? I don't know if you've ever been in a pagan campout somewhere, but I'm always a go to bed late and wake up early. Thank you, U.S. Army. But I'd get up in the morning at a campout with 500 people around and watch all the people that are getting out of one tent and going back to their tents. So are you going to allow that too? What are the rules going to be? How strict do you want them to be? You can also limit the number of people that are going to be in your coven by applying too many rules, right? So you have to weigh that and figure out what you're going to allow and what you're not going to allow. But I mean, if you think back to the conversation about it being business, if you don't think it's a business, look at the Catholic Church. They will prove to you that it is absolutely a business. Every cathedral on the planet has a treasury.
13 years is a long time to have a coven.
Yes, it is.
How often did you meet during the year?
Weekly.
Oh, you met weekly.
We met every Friday night.
I would say that's even more stressful than having your whole extended family for Thanksgiving.
Yes, absolutely.
You'd have it every week.
That is absolutely a correct statement. It is a house full of people at Thanksgiving for 52 weeks a year. We altered that. We did allow people, I mean, not everybody would show up, right? People have vacations, they have lives, they have business trips, they have those things. So those that could make it would make it, and those that couldn't wouldn't. And we would take most of our vacations at that time were CMA events, right? We're going camping, but we're going to a pagan event, and that was our getaway. But yes, that was a really long time, and I loved every minute of it. But now I look back on it now and go, wow, I lost some years of my life doing that.
Do you really feel that you did? I mean, it was your passion.
Oh, it was absolutely my passion. I don't go into things halfway. I'm all in. So all in for 13 years, meetings every week. As soon as I would finish what I had planned for the week on Sunday after everyone left, because people would show up on Friday, they'd stay the weekend. So they'd show up on Friday, some would leave Friday, some would leave Saturday, some would leave Sunday. So we would do magical weekends every weekend. And when I finished what we had planned Sunday, I would write my notes and close that book and start preparing for the next week. So it was a constant education because we did counseling with each of our participants because, like I mentioned, we taught in the Wiccan tradition, but each person individually had their own tradition. So we had, for lack of a better term, a counseling session with each person that following Friday. Before anything started, we would start with one-on-one counseling sessions and see, had they done their homework? What did they learn? What did they get out of it? What did they get out of the week before? What did they not get out of it? What needed to be different? What did we need to do different to make it better for them to get the information that we were trying to provide? It was an amazing time, but it was tiring. I got gray hair.
I'm just imagining how much cleaning is involved. Cleaning before everybody comes and cleaning after everybody leaves.
Well, that was part of it, right? So the ritual space, everybody stayed in the house. So we had a giant living room with couches in it, and we had 2 guest rooms with the beds in it, and our master suite that we were in, and people could just sleep if they wanted to stay. But that was part of it. The whole house was a ritual space. So when people first got there, we would do the one-on-ones, and at the same time, cleaning was happening. And then Sunday, when everybody was done, we'd have a meal, and then cleaning was happening. So we cleaned the coven space before and after. It made managing that space a lot easier.
Did you have an initiation for each member who joined your coven?
Yes. Yes, we did.
Can you talk about that initiation?
I mean, it was a traditional Wiccan initiation because they hadn't defined what their path was going to be yet, their personal path. So it was, we had our own variations of it, but it was a traditional Wiccan initiation. Nothing out of the ordinary from that. Now, their individual initiations based on their tradition, that was all catered to their tradition. So it was specific to whatever their tradition was.
I don't think people really understand the seriousness of a coven. Some people think, oh, we're going to have a coven and everything is going to be, flowers and rainbows and butterflies, and we're all going to get along. It's just for fun. But most covens are to teach.
If you don't think there's trials and tribulations, we worked with covens in Dallas, and we had done a celebration of summer. And I think there were about 10 or 11 covens there. And two of the young 18-year-olds in two different covens, it was one of those where I woke up in the morning and I watched somebody go out of one tent and get into their tent. And somebody got upset about that. And we got a phone call the very next Friday that guy was coming down to do mass casualty. And I had to, I was like, what? That would be a bad thing for you to come here wielding a weapon. That would not be good. So I ended up having to call the high priest and high priestess of that coven and see, we have a problem. You need to get a hold of this person, and they're coming here, is what we've been told. And I don't want to see them come here and do something stupid. As you have a coven, you have to work with other covens, and it behooves you to understand and know who those people are and to create those relationships. Because if you don't, that could have been a very, very bad day. That young man did show up. He did arrive that Friday night, but I was waiting for him when he got there. Like, you need to get right back in your car and drive right back to Dallas before you do something stupid. And he did. So we avoided a tragedy. But you need to know who you're working with and who the other covens are.
Well, as far as like one person coming out of a tent that they don't belong in, that happens
Frequently.
everywhere. It happens
Yeah.
in the military barracks. It happens on a Navy ship. It happens in people's neighborhoods. Those things just happen, and they're hard to prevent.
Yes, they are. Yes, particularly with people who are really attuned to that energy. Whether it be age, just the fact of being around that much energy can trigger that. We had families in the coven, so we had two minors that were only allowed to participate when their parents were, and that was a hard thing to get around too, because the children are really susceptible to that energy and they don't know what to do with it. So that's a thing you have to be very careful with if you have children. You have to set really, really strict guidelines on what they can and can't do, what others can and can't do when they're around her. You got to know that the parents are okay with people being skyclad in a circle with their kids in a circle. That's a no-no. That'll get you in trouble. So, yeah, you've got to establish that and understand it right up front and make it known. Because if you don't, people are going to get mad. Somebody's going to get their feelings hurt, or somebody's going to get in legal trouble.
Well, we're just about out of time. So is there anything else that you think is important for the listeners to know before we finish this show?
No, I think we've covered it, but I mean, this was kind of doom and gloom, but it is a business, right? It's a lot of fun. And once you establish the rules and the roles that people are going to play and what their jobs are going to be and how you do all of that, good preparation ahead of time and figuring out where do you want to be as a coven in 1 year, 3 year, 5 years really will help you in the long run, and you'll have a lot of fun and it will be an absolute blast. So enjoy if you're doing it.
I often hear people talk about their coven as family. That's my family.
Absolutely. And you'll go through the the trials and tribulations of their life, because you're going to be so entwined with them. A lot of that is drama, right? So we have these winning formulas and stories that we live by that define who we are. And a lot of the space inside of the coven can help people through those winning formulas. You become not only a family, but you become the psychologist and the psychiatrist and the counselor and the marriage counselor and all of those pieces. But if it's done right, and it's done with transparency, and it's done in the space of helping each other, it'll be great. It will become the best support network you could ever have.
Well, for 13 years, that was dedication, and it doesn't sound like it was all doom and gloom. It sounds like you really enjoyed it, and your coven members must have enjoyed it, or they wouldn't have stayed all those years.
Yeah, I think we did a good thing. I still talk to many of them today.
And now you have the circle on your property. You're on a farm, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So how do people find out about you, and if they want to do a circle, or do you invite people for circles?
When we get the space ready, completed the way we want it to be, then we will publicly let that be known. I will certainly let you know.
And you could probably have a hand fasting venue.
Yes, we will. We have people that can do that today legally. So, yes.
Yes, we do. Okay. Thank you, Petros, for another fantastic episode. And maybe we'll have more in the future.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was a great pleasure.
It was. Blessed be.
Blessed be.
Thank you for joining us for Witchcasting with Theodora Pendragon. Have a burning question or have a topic you'd love Theodora and her guests to discuss on the show? Contact her through Instagram at Theodora Pendragon. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And help us spread the word by leaving us a rating and review and sharing it with your friends. See you next time, and may your magic always shine.